What's going on, guys? My name is Tommy. Welcome back to the channel. It is presently 3:30 in the morning where I am. On a whim, my wife and I have decided to drive to Indianapolis, Indiana for our 3-year wedding anniversary. However, I know how much you guys are digging the Pathfinder 2nd edition stuff, so I did bring my computer with me on our 7-hour, give or take, because we lost an hour somewhere, journey. Today we're talking about Paizo's recent blog where they talk about critical successes and critical failures. It's going to be kind of a double speak because I found this on a forum about a week ago, but there's a couple new feats and things floating around in the blog that I'd like to bring up because they're super sweet. Also, I've finished the rest of the Glass Cannon podcast, and there's some fun stuff in there as well. Some stuff that turns out I missed that's super relevant. Apologies again for sounding super tired. Again, it's 3:30 in the morning where I am, but we're getting to it. Don't forget, guys, our Pathfinder Doomsday Dawn playtest giveaway is live. Once we get to around $150 a month on Patreon, I'll run you and 5 of your fellow subscribers through the first ever published piece of content for the Pathfinder 2nd edition playtest. And I am pleased to announce today we have received patron number 6. We're sitting at $48 out of $150, meaning we are officially 33% of the way to being funded, and it also means that today, this episode of your Pathfinder 2nd edition preview content was brought to you in part by Kendall Carson. Kendall, thank you so much for your time and support. Thank you for being a random stranger on the internet who's had enough faith in me to give me as much money as you're giving me a month to help see this thing through. And I did message you on Patreon to let you know that your rewards will be coming on Monday. In case you don't see that, you can hear it here right now. I'll get with you on Monday for the Discord invite and all the other fun rewards therein. Now, before I fall asleep at this desk, let's get to it. So before we talk about the blog, we're going to talk about the stuff that was released in parts 3 and 4 of the Glass Cannon podcast, the stuff that we see as they ran through the next part of the Crypt of the Everflame. A lot of it is really relevant, some of it is just kind of random tidbits of knowledge, but this video will flesh out everything that is the resonance mechanic that's going to determine how our magic items work in Pathfinder 2nd edition. Before we get to that, though, the big takeaway other than resonance from the Pathfinder playtest was that fall damage has been rebuilt from the ground up. Of course, in Pathfinder 1st edition, we all know that if we fall 10 feet, it's 1d6 damage. If we fall 100 feet, it's 10d6 damage no longer. Henceforth, the damage you take from a fall equals the distance that you fell. You fall 10 feet, you take 10 damage. You fall 100 feet, you take 100 damage, etc., etc. You guys get the idea. Long story short, somebody hit the gravity button. Falls have become a lot more dangerous and a lot more realistic. Jason Bowman in the podcast did say something along the lines of, turns out falls are actually super deadly. And we will be seeing that moving forward in Pathfinder. Bring your boots of Featherfall, kids. Next up, in Pathfinder 2nd edition, the knowledge skill checks will be replaced by lore skill checks, and we've got our hands on 2 more of them. The first one is known as occultism. I imagine that's maybe a little arcana, maybe a little the planes, maybe actually a knowledge psychic spellcasters all rolled into one. Not sure, it was never rolled, it was just brought up. The second one is called underworld, and that doesn't mean we're fighting a Cerberus and we're gonna go down to the river Styx and pull some souls out. The underworld checks are for our criminals, for our rogues. All of that knowledge local that wouldn't be covered in a society check is covered in underworld. I like that it seems like a lot of the magic-y knowledge checks are being rolled together because not only does it make room for other skill checks moving forward, it also means we don't have to invest in so wide a spread to have good coverage. On the other side of that token, the fact that knowledge underworld now exists instead of knowledge local being the catch-all is a little more telling of the rogues, the bards, maybe even the criminal background being more relevant in big city campaigns because maybe they are the only ones who have access to it. Of course, we'll still have to see. All we know is the iconic rogue had lore underworld. Next up, we have a couple of conditions and a new cantrip for the clerics. We'll do that one first. It is called Forbidding Ward, which gives a +1 to AC and saves against one enemy. You have to have line of sight both to the target that you wish to target, whether that's yourself or an ally, and line of sight to the enemy. But it's a cantrip, so we can spam it as often as we need to do so. And it's a free +1 to our armor class in a world where the numbers won't be so high. Yeah, sure, I'll take it. Next up, we have 2 conditions, the sickened condition and the enfeebled condition, which we talked about during our 2nd edition rogue coverage. Both of these conditions have numerical values which indicate the penalty you take. So for example, if I have the Sickened 1 condition, I have a -1 penalty on my saves and skill checks and attack rolls and things like that. But in addition, you can't willingly ingest things like potions while you're sick. You can, however, spend an action to retch, go off in the corner and gag, maybe throw up, maybe don't. It depends on your character, I guess, which causes a fort save to be rolled, which decreases the value of your condition by 1 or by 2 if you critically hit. We'll talk about crits and stuff here in a second. The enfeebled condition is mostly the same thing, except you can't, throw it up out of you. It's a progressive -1 to your strength-based actions and attack rolls, stuff like that, and it is dealt now by shadows. The bit of bright news in these crazy times is shadows don't seem to be nearly as deadly as they are in Pathfinder 1st Edition. When a shadow hits you, it now does HP damage, and it must spend an action after it hits you to apply the feebled condition. No longer is it half your strength score on a touch attack, no, it does actual HP damage, though it's still a touch attack, and then if it spends another action, it can put enfeebled on you. Much less scary for sure. On the subject of things that are now less scary, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, it will be considerably easier to tumble through the bad guys' squares. Not only is that now a free action as part of a stride, but it's no longer half speed with the exception of the square of the bad guy that you're moving through, which is counted now as difficult terrain. In Pathfinder 1st Edition, we had to roll an acrobatics check versus something like 20 bajillion plus the bad guy's CMD. Now it's just an acrobatics over their reflex DC, which is a much, much, much smaller number, which means we're going to see this happen a lot more. We're going to see rogues and monks doing sweep backflips over people and then stabbing from behind for sneak attack. I can get behind it. A last little note before we talk about resonance. The amount of hit points you gain back when you rest has been overhauled as well. No longer is it 8 hours equals your con mod now, it's 8 hours equals your con mod times your level. So if you have 18 con and you're level 1, you would get 4 HP for every 8 hours of rest. If you are 18 con and level 5, you would get 20. You see the math here. What this means is as you go higher and higher up in level in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the less time you have to spend resting to shake off the spears to your chest and negative energy attacking your brain and stuff like that. It also means that those of us who have chosen to ignore our constitution at character creation will still be able to gain hit points back. The guy who's got 12 con doesn't have to sleep for 3 weeks to sleep off the last battle if he's level 10. Flavor-wise, this feels kind of weird because, again, you're getting stabbed in the guts and mauled by tigers and mauled by zombie tigers and a bunch of other fun fantasy stuff. But I mean, it puts you back in the fight faster and it's less time spent figuring out how long people have to rest to heal. Yeah, sure, cool, let's do it. Okay, now, elephant in the room, let's talk about resonance in a little more detail. Like we said before, a character's resonance pool is equal to their level plus their charisma modifier. What we didn't say, because we didn't know it at the time, is that resonance does not apply to wielded magic items, so my +1 longsword does not use a point of resonance unless it has some kind of fireball effect, in which case activating that effect will consume a point of resonance. Resonance does apply to armor, it does apply to potions, it does apply to things like that. In the morning, when you get up to adventure and you put on your armor, you invest a point of your resonance into that armor to have its effect on you, but every time you drink a potion, use a magic item, blah blah blah, you consume a point of resonance. When your resonance pool goes to 0 and you try to use an item or drink a potion, you make what's called a flat check, which is just a straight roll of the d20. Roll a 2 to 10, the item has no effect, the potion is just simply funny tasting water. From an 11 to 20, the item works. Of course, and this will be a theme we talk about later in the video again for the second time, a natural 1 on this flat check means no more magic items for the day. Which of course doesn't include things you're already invested in like your magic armor. If you try to drink several potions when you're at 0 resonance, there's a penalty involved. The DC of the flat check for the second potion is 12, then it goes to 13, etc, 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 etc. Again, what this means is you can no longer buy Wands of Cure Light Wounds and hug them when you feel bad. Classes that can heal, the clerics, perhaps the bards, we don't quite know yet, but we assume probably the druids as well, all become more powerful in the healer slot. Because again, we can't just all invest in our own healing. Alchemists also make wonderful healers too, and for an alchemist, though the elixirs of life the alchemist passes out will count towards the fighter's resonance, an alchemist can drink his own potions without consuming any of his resonance. And really, I'm very excited to see where the 2nd edition alchemist goes because it's one of my favorite classes, and now it's not a spellcaster. It's a little odd for me because I'm a big fan of every character is responsible for his or her own healing, so we don't have to have somebody who's just, I'm the healer, la la la. but there is a part of me that sees the transition to Pathfinder 2nd Edition feeling a lot like a transition to like the classic adventuring party. And it's going to mean everybody's role in the party matters that much more. It's going to be a very interesting meta for sure moving forward. Speaking of interesting meta, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you can wear as many rings or as many amulets as you want. Of course, they'll still take resonance, but if you want 10 rings and 20 amulets, if you want to be that guy, you can do it. Finally, we've got there. Okay, that's all of that. Now onto the blog. Again, we've already talked about the 4 degrees of success in our video about how the save or suck spells are getting overhauled, but in case you missed it, we'll touch on it real quick. Henceforth, in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, we'll have successes, critical successes, failures, and critical failures for everything that goes on that requires a d20 roll. We won't spend a whole lot of time touching on these because, again, we've talked about it, but the idea is if I cast Fireball and you fumble the save, you take double damage. If I cast Fireball and you crit the save, you take nothing, and that goes for everything in the entry of the spell or the ability that says it has a critical success or critical failure or even a failure entry. For example, the strike only has an effect on the success or critical success. There's no penalty for failing the strike, other than, you just missed. Also, since there is no effect for critically failing a strike, that means normally nothing bad happens unless the thing you're attacking has a reaction, I'm assuming. And one of those things is a reaction a fighter can take, probably as a class feat known as Twin Riposte. When something critically fails an attack against the fighter can use one of his weapons to parry the attack and attack for free with the other weapon as a reaction. So in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the fighter has become the swashbuckler kind of, and the sphere of power that the fighter seems to be getting has expanded that much farther. Also, we've seen our first official entry in a little bit of how 2-weapon fighting works, which is super exciting because, again, that's like my favorite playstyle. Speaking of fighters, they will get, again, this is probably a class feat, a special action called Certain Strike, which functions the same way as a strike, which is an attack action, except on a failure, not a critical failure, but if your armor class is 20 and I get an 18, my attack does minimum damage against you. So if I'm rolling 2d8 plus 4, I do 6 damage. If I'm rolling d6 plus 4, I do 5. That's not a whole lot of extra damage, sure, but damage it is, and again, it goes to show that the fighter is getting a lot of love in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and that love will help him do what he needs to do in combat, fight. It looks pretty good so far. In addition, we have seen what improved evasion looks like in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Characters with legendary reflex saves that have improved evasion will count critical failures as failures when they roll a reflex save, and thus can never suffer the worst part of a reflex save against, again, for example, Fireball, even if they nat 1. On the subject of evasion, regular evasion gives you master proficiency in reflex saves, and it lets you treat successes on reflex saves as though they were critical successes. Now, again, the 4 degrees of success are mostly being put into play to stop the slumber hexes, the hold persons, the saver loses, the saver you're paralyzed and the fighter will come coup de grace you, that are super effective in Pathfinder 1st Edition, and I love them so much it will be sad to see them go. But I can agree with it because it can make encounters go by really fast, and it makes a disparity between the casters and the non-casters to just, I cast hold person, I failed my save, encounter over. And also, to quote Paizo, if you don't just win when you cast hold person, chances are that you've just wasted your turn by casting hold person and having the bad guy pass his will save. With 4 degrees of success, again still quoting Paizo, the design space broadens significantly. You can still suffer effects that take you out of the action entirely if you fumble, and you can completely ignore the effects on a critical success. But on a failure, you suffer a powerful effect, but doesn't take you entirely out of the fight. And even on a success, you suffer a milder effect that's still useful for the wizard that cast the spell. The example they use when they're talking about this is the Dominate spell. If you critically fail your save, you are completely under the caster's control, but if you just fail it, you can try to break out each round. On a successful save, you're not controlled, but you essentially become slowed, losing an action on your next turn as you struggle to fight off the dude that's trying to get in your head. And of course, again, a critical success means you're golden. So before we sign off here, real quick, at the end of the blog, Paizo has given us some, as they call it, mysterious critical effects. We don't know what spells and abilities these effects connect to, but I imagine we can guess a lot of them, and hey, if you have any guesses for what does what, throw them in the comments, we'll keep the hype train a-rolling. The effects from your critical successes and critical failures in Pathfinder 2nd Edition include, but are not limited to, the creature is banished and can't return to your home plane by any means for a week. The creature takes the full collapse damage and falls into a fissure. Ooh, bad. The target believes the fact for an unlimited duration. Possibly worse. The target's intellect is permanently reduced below that of an animal, and it treats its charisma, intelligence, and wisdom modifiers as -5. It loses all class abilities that require mental faculties, including all spellcasting. If the target is a PC, they become an NPC under the GM's control. Okay, yeah, that one's the worst so far for sure. The creature is pushed 30 feet in the direction of the wind, is knocked prone, and takes 2d6 bludgeoning damage. You grant a +4 circumstance bonus. I'm guessing that's aid another when you crit it. Per a failure, except the target believes that everyone it sees is a mortal enemy. It uses its reactions and free actions against these enemies regardless of whether they were previously its allies, as determined by the GM. It otherwise acts as rationally as normal and will likely prefer to attack enemies that are actively attacking or hindering it. The target must succeed at a fortitude save or die. Even on a successful save, the target is frightened 2. Remember, that's a -2 to whatever it is frightened affects, and they must flee for a round. Your target regains hit points equal to 2d10 plus your wisdom modifier per a success, but even afterward, the target is too scared of you to retaliate against you. Again, if you think you know what any of these might happen to be, throw them in the comments below. So what do you guys think about all this stuff? Are we worried about how powerful natural ones and crits are going to be moving forward? Or, like me, are we super stoked that what feels like essentially the world's most popular house rule has been made canon? Most importantly, are we still stoked out there for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, guys? I'm sure I am. I'm also sure that it's 4:02 in the morning, and we went to a city that, out of nowhere, has a Comic-Con happening tomorrow, with guest stars including, but not limited to, the Weasley twins, Neville Longbottom, the sheriff from Stranger Things, whose name isn't coming to mind, and Jonathan Frakes from Star Trek. Yeah, I've got a full weekend ahead of me. As always, guys, be sure to like and subscribe for more videos. We'll see you next time.